What's up, everybody? Welcome to Podcast Now. I'm Alex, and in this video, want to talk about a different part to all of these Insomniac leaks and try to form a discussion about it, not just make it all about the leaks themselves, but talk about budgets for video games, the sales for video games, and why I do think something needs to change. Now, you could probably also talk about the strengths and weaknesses of some Sony IPs. It pains me to say it, but it is possible that maybe just some franchises are destined to not be supported all that much. But I really do want to look at it in the way of huge budgets, which means you need to sell a huge amount of games. So, again, I've tried to play it as safe as I can while also talking about the leaks. I do find some of them interesting, and, obviously the personal Insomniac data, that stuff's terrible. That stuff, obviously, you don't want out there. But when it comes to the game sales, I feel like, it's okay to talk about. And again, we're not talking about anything too specific, but I do want to throw in, some of these sales of the Days Gone of the world and the Bloodborns of the world, reaching 7 million units. Like Horizon Zero Dawn actually outselling Uncharted 4, I actually think is absolutely nuts. Now that's selling, right? Technically that doesn't include any other way that the game is out there. I imagine more people had Uncharted 4 than Horizon through, whether it's free or bundles or whatever. But one thing definitely caught my eye. Actually, technically two things. And it made me upset and it made me consider, making this video. So we had Sunset Overdrive, right? Sells 1.9 million, not exact, right? But 1.9 is the easiest way of saying it. 1.9, and it made Insomniac $500 and I believe $67. Okay, now that's like the big story going around. I think what like console warriors or fanboys or whatever are trying to turn it into something like that. Again, you can say, is it a reflection of the franchise? Is a franchise like Sunset Overdrive ever gonna sell, 5, 6, 7 million units? Well, no. And I think that's okay. And follow me through because this is really where I want to go in this video. You had Sunset Overdrive do that, okay? That's sad because I think that game is actually really, really good. And I've always wanted it to, number one, come over to PlayStation. But number two, give me a remaster of it. Heck, give me a Sunset Overdrive 2. I think it can happen. Now, we probably know why it's not going to happen. And then the other one that's scary is Ratchet & Clank, okay? So Ratchet & Clank, now this was, I believe, as of February 2022. Now, it has been almost 2 years since this data. So all those numbers you're seeing, Uncharted and Spider-Man and Miles and Horizon and Until Dawn selling 4 million, right? All those numbers, that's as of February of 2022. So it's had almost 2 years. Now, is it going to sell outrageously more in the last 2 years? Probably not, right? But Ratchet & Clank sold, just over 2 million, I think 2.2 million units, and it ended up losing Insomniac around $8 million. And there was a spreadsheet kind of thing that showed the budget, and obviously the big budgets for Wolverine, for Spider-Man 3, they're all out there. Don't really need to go into that, honestly, but the concern that I have and the discussion I want to have is this is why things need to change, okay? If you tell me that Sony's push to live service is simply to be able to make more risky moves with smaller games that they can literally take a risk on, and if they don't work, they don't work. I'm actually all for, I've been very against live service, the live service push, and we've talked about it 1,000 times. But if you tell me that it's simply necessary so that they have some reoccurring income so that they can do riskier things, I actually say, show me them all. Give me 10 live service games a year. I exaggerate, but at the end of the day, I actually would side with that. I get that because, again, where we're going with this, is it actually any surprise that Ratchet & Clank is only doing one game every decade? Well, I obviously don't. I said in the last video earlier today, I said I hate that. I really don't like that. I want Ratchet & Clank games more than every 10 years and more than once a console generation. But the sad truth is, now is Ratchet & Clank a franchise that can actually sell like super well? Well, as it turns out, the reboot, remake, I think it was 2016, that game actually sold 7 million. So it could be that Rift Apart, because of it coming out within the first year of the PS5, I believe it was $70, that stopped it from doing better. And I hope, well, the thing is, I hope Sony sees that and says, well, look, the game before that sold 7 million. This game sold 2. So, like, well, what happened? Well, I think you can look at it the way I just did. Well, it's within the first year of a console coming out. You're not even gonna have that many people that have the console itself, right? Now, is that how they look at it? Well, I mean, you're getting one every 10 years. So I actually don't think that's how they look at it. I think they look at it as it is a risk because it takes time, it takes money, but the money, yeah, you're going to lose a couple $1 million actually to put that game out. It's more of almost a passion project, I guess, at this point. But also, well, why would you do Ratchet & Clank when you could do Marvel games instead? And there lies part of the issue. One push with Insomniac doing all this Marvel stuff. I've said my controversial opinion is I don't like that. I don't really want Insomniac to do it. I have said, they should do what they want to do if they're okay with it, whatever. But I guess I understand. Actually, no, I don't guess. I completely understand. At the end of the day, these things are about money. And if you're going to make in this way, like a passion project, something that Insomniac loves, but if it literally doesn't sell enough to make its money back, well then, why would you make it? Meanwhile, you have all these Marvel games that, yes, cost incredible amounts of money, insane amounts of money, but they make the money back and then some. They make almost $100 million of profit after all said and done. And that's just single. I mean, they haven't even introduced like multiplayer elements, which is coming, right? So I think I understand that. Like, I get why you would do it. Now, what makes me depressed is like, well, that's why you can't get Ratchet & Clank. I'm always talking about Sly Cooper. Well, if you actually look back, fun fact, and this was known several years ago, but I thought I'd bring it back up. Sly Cooper, Thieves in Time. That game had a budget of $9 million, or at least that's what the pitch was. They pitched a budget of $9 million, and they said they would break even off of 400,000, I think it was 413,000 units sold. And I looked at that, and my jaw stayed attached. But I was like, oh, this is why you're never going to get this. This is why, for as much as I love Resistance, and I talk about it all the time, this is why I like maybe a remaster collection, but you will never get a Resistance 4. You will never get a Sly 5. I think a Sly collection would work, because actually, as you can see from the sales leaks, if you go look it up, the remasters or collection whenever they kind of re-bring a game back, it actually does pretty well. And even the more specific or when it's a little bit more data to it, you actually see it doesn't even cost. It costs a good amount to make a remaster or to, have a collection of some sort, but it doesn't cost as much as, say, making a Wolverine or a Marvel Spider-Man 3. Doing Spider-Man 2 remastered, 3 years from now, costs so much less. And weirdly enough, even though people complain about it, I complain about it sometimes when a remaster happens too soon, or a remake. It's like, well, the game came out 7 years ago, you're doing a remake. You know what? I talk all the smack that I do. Now, I don't end up buying it, but you know what? A lot of people do, because those games make a lot of money and make Sony money, make PlayStation money. So again, at the end of the day, in that way, that's one part of this. I'm going to get into the second part in just a second. I understand why you wouldn't get a Sly. $9 million budget 10 years ago. 10 years ago. It would not be that now, right? You'd have to think it would be 20 million at least, maybe even higher than that. And so what? You need to sell 1.5 million units in order to break even. And I use Sly, but you can use Ratchet & Clank, you can use Resistance, you can use a PlayStation All-Stars, you can use Jak and Daxter, you can use any of these kind of deep cut franchise that actually really aren't all that deep cut, but for whatever reason, well, they just don't sell all that well. Now, okay, some of these franchises can sell, some of them maybe they just can't, or they can't sell as well. Now, is that the problem? Well, it's part of the problem, right? If you have a franchise that, say, is capped, that there's 1 million fans on planet Earth, and they will buy one copy each, so you're locked in for 1 million units. There is a, inherent problem to that, right? Because you're locked in, you have a cap. But the other problem is that budget, okay? This is something I've talked about time and time again. This is something that I constantly reference, the Sean Layden thing. We need to figure out a way, not we, actually I have nothing to do with this, I'm just, an onlooker, just somebody who talks, way too much actually, but this is something the industry really needs to buckle themselves down and freaking figure out, because this is not sustainable. If you, even Wolverine and Spider-Man, going into that budget just for a second, right? These are games that cost $300 million plus to make, right? Insomniac, if you look at, say, those 10 years, You have to imagine they are spending roughly $1 billion just in budget to put those games out. And that's, 300 million here, 300 million there, 250 million there. You already get to $1 billion if you just do that like 2.5 times, okay? Maybe like 3, if, depends on the number, right? So I think that's a problem just, by itself, because, all right, well, automatically you are assuming and you are praying to whatever God you believe in. You're praying that these games can do it. Because if Spider-Man can't sell 10, 15, 20 million units, you are in so much trouble because you have sunk so many tens or hundreds of millions into it. In loss, you would lose that amount of money. So that's one problem. And it's not, by the way, the point of this video is not just like we're using the Insomniac leaks, but it's not Insomniac. I bring up Resistance, but Sly, bring up any franchise from any publisher or developer that you kind of want to see back, okay? Or you want to see continued, or you want to see spin-offs or whatever it is, right? A Kingdom Hearts spin-off. Well, a Kingdom Hearts spin-off might cost like $75 million for whatever reason to develop, and so it needs to sell, say, 2, 3, 4 million units when it wouldn't have had to do that, 15 years ago. And again, that's the problem, and that's what Sean Layden has said, and that's what, we've talked about so much on this channel. You gotta fix this. You can't have games costing this much. There's a bubble, and I just said it in the way I kind of skim over examples too much, and I'm sorry about that. I ramble. Like, if one of these were to fail, you've lost so much. You know what I mean? You're trying to go for big guarantees. You can't take risks. You need to go for live service to almost like get, like I said, reoccurring income in case you mess up something else. Well, you have something to fall back on. And, I bring up my favorite franchise to say of all time, the Sly Coopers. You can never do those because, well, do budgets for games even of a Sly Cooper size, can those budgets even be small, quote unquote, like 10, 15, 20 million dollars to make a game? Now, yes, there are games that do it, but, again, we talk about it so often. I'm not saying don't pay people, right? A lot of the budget for any of these games is actually the employees. You think you have a studio of, say, 200 people, you pay them, say, $100,000, average, and then you multiply that, $100,000 a year as an average, right? Some make more, some make less, and that number will keep going up as time goes on. And again, I'm not saying don't pay them, but, like, the problem here is you're doing that, and then games take 5, 6, 7 years to make. So now multiply that by 7 years. It's unsustainable, and I'm not saying fire them, I'm not saying pay them less, but really, there is one thing I am saying. You got to figure out how to make games in shorter times. And it goes back to the conversations we've had quite often on this channel where, well, what makes these games take so long? Well, one element is oftentimes they try to be too big. I think gamers have become accustomed to games, taking up 30, 40, 50, 60 hours of their lives. And I actually understand where people are coming from. If you tell me in the next couple of years that we revert back to games being 10 hours long, I don't actually know if people would accept. I would, because for me, it's always quality over quantity. But some people do not think like that. And also, I don't necessarily blame them because we've been conditioned. Every game needs to be longer than what came before. Every single one. And that's not how it should be. Like, I'm telling you right now, that's how I think. I believe that's the right way, because what ends up happening, right, is if you have quantity, if you have 60 hours, but only 20 of them are good and 40 are fluff, well, then couldn't you have taken those 40 out? Yes. The answer is yes. You actually could do that. You would change the game a bit, and also maybe you'd make people mad because it's not as long, but also, you know what else would happen? You'd cut back on development time, which means you'd save money, which means you probably would be able to take other risks. To me, this is how I want to end this video. There's only two ways this keeps well, there's a couple different elements, but maybe two things in all. So this will keep going. Like, there's no stopping it. There is one thing that stops it is, like a recession-like thing, like the bubble popping, right? For this kind of medium. This will continue. The only things you can do, I think, to safely try to stop it is inject as many live service games which is what everybody is doing. I don't like that. But at the same, as I said in the beginning, I'm willing to, wave the flag saying, hey, I give up. Because if you need a game that brings in 20, 30, 40, 50 million dollars every year, just, through nothing, through meaningless and mindless, battle passes and season passes, just you have people spending their money on that for whatever reason. I don't know why people do it, but it is what it is, right? But hey, you know what? If you get that money coming into PlayStation, maybe you can go fund a Jack and Daxter thing or a Sly. Or, I'm talking about established games that already exist. What about a new IP that costs 30, 40? Not every game can be The Last of Us. Some games have to start small. And you don't really have that luxury right now if you're in the big AAA gaming space. You don't. It needs to be a guarantee. So what do? Well, you either have live service out the yin-yang so that you're getting as much money as possible to be able to survive your other endeavors, or you have to backtrack at the size of the game. The games have to start kind of coming down. I guess maybe there's a third of, and this is actually what happens, like a lot of reused assets. Like when people complain that Ragnarok is too close to God of War, well, that still took 4 years, 4.5, almost 5, to make that game. Took almost 5 years, and yes, a lot of that game is very similar. Not that it's bad. I actually really like Ragnarok, but so much of it is similar to 2018. I'm using it as an example because people had some big problems with it, but that took almost 5 years, and a lot of the stuff they had already created. Imagine if they had to start from scratch. Imagine if that took 8, 9 years. Could it even happen? Well, if the sales weren't that, maybe the sales drop a little bit, they'd be losing out on tens of millions of dollars. The budget would be too big. So this is the problem. To me, this is the problem. You either have to shorten the game development time, which in my opinion, it's not the easy answer of like cut the fluff. I think it would actually work in like 60% of cases. I think others are more like case-by-case basis. But I do think cutting the fluff would work for like half of the games. You either do that or you have enough money coming in from other avenues to supplement it. And, that's actually kind of what Xbox, with Game Pass, and obviously they have their own live service stuff with like a Sea of Thieves. They obviously purchase, so they bring in the CODs of the world and World of Warcraft. So they have a lot of just money coming in. And you could say that's good or bad, but ultimately they could take a risk of like making a Crash Bandicoot, or Activision before them could take a risk in doing Crash because Crash does make money back. But when you have COD that is just like a printing press every single year, you can do other like random you can't. Like that's what happens, right? So, how did I get all this from an Insomniac leak? Well, again, it's because of the money that they're putting into these games versus the money that they're getting from it. And I think it's just another sign, right? Like seeing these numbers in front of your eyes, seeing that Sunset Overdrive sells 2 million, let's round up just a little, sells 2 million and broke even. Like that, 10, 15 years, I mentioned Sly. That would have been 4 times the amount that Sly Cooper needed to break even. And it's like, yeah, they're different games and different studios, Insomniac, Sucker Punch, but at the same time, it's like, well, if you go back 10, 15 years, then yeah, the economy and inflation and people's costs and all that stuff, but also it's how we've been making games. The literal process of making games, I kind of think is broken, and it can't keep going like this. I'm telling you right now, it cannot keep going like this, and it won't. Eventually, it will blow up, and it'll stop. It's just, do you want it to explode on the fly? Like one random day, just everything collapses, because that's where you're going. That's absolutely where you're going. Or would you want to kind of fix it on the fly? You're going to have some problems. It's not all going to be perfect, but try to like fix the machine as it's pumping stuff out, right? Like tighten the knots and maybe something explodes. Well, you patch that up later, right? Figure it out, because otherwise the machine's just going to die one day and you're not going to be able to turn it back on. And I think that's a good analogy. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel, bell icon turned on, and I hope to see you all on the next one.